She kissed her children goodnight, tucked them into bed, and told them she loved them more than anything in the world. Then, once the lights were off and the house was quiet, she became someone else entirely. A different name, a different phone, a different life. By day she was a devoted single mother running a children's dance studio. By night, she was a woman known only by the name Carrie, selling her body to strangers to keep a roof over her children's heads. She told no one, not her family, not her closest friends, not even the man who once loved her. She carried this secret alone, believing it was the only way to protect the 4 small people who depended on her. And then, one summer evening, she vanished without a trace. It would take investigators 5 long years, a chance discovery by a hiker, and one devastating slip of the tongue to uncover what really happened to her, and to expose a double life so carefully hidden that even the people who loved her most never saw it coming. This is the story of Paige Birgfeld. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Brian's Criminal Unmasking, the place where we dig beneath the headlines and uncover the human stories hiding inside the world's most chilling cases. If that sounds like your kind of channel, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a case. And if you're the type who likes to guess the ending before we get there, drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, let's get into the story of a mother who was willing to risk everything for her children, and the secret that may have cost her life. To understand what happened to Paige Birgfeld, you first have to understand who she was before any of this began. Those who knew her described a woman defined almost entirely by her devotion to her children. She was 34 years old, sharp, driven, and fiercely protective of her 3 young kids. Friends said she never missed a school event, never forgot a birthday, never let her children see her struggle, even when the struggle was very real. Paige lived in Grand Junction, Colorado, a quiet western town where everybody seemed to know everybody. On the surface, her life looked like the kind of life a lot of hard-working single mothers lead. She owned a small children's dance school called Brain Dance, where local kids came to learn ballet and tap. On the side, she sold kitchen products for a well-known home party company, hosting little gatherings in neighbors' living rooms, smiling through the exhaustion, always finding one more way to bring in extra income. But behind the smile was a woman under enormous financial pressure, the kind of pressure that had been building for years, long before she ever went missing. Paige had been married twice. Her first marriage was to her high school sweetheart, a man named Ron Beegler. They had 1 daughter together before the marriage ended, but unlike so many failed relationships, Paige and Ron managed to stay close. He remained a steady, trusted presence in her life for years afterward, someone she could call, someone who still checked in on her. Her second marriage was a very different story. Paige's second husband was a man named Rob Dixon, and together they had 2 more children, bringing her family to 3 kids in total. From the outside, this marriage might have looked like a fresh start. In reality, it became the beginning of years of fear. According to Paige's own father, Rob wasn't one person. He was 2. There was the version everyone else got to see, charming, likable, easy to be around. Her father would later describe this version simply as good Rob. But behind closed doors, a different man emerged entirely, one who was volatile, controlling, and frightening. The family came to call this version Bad Rob, and it was Bad Rob who Paige lived with in private. The financial side of the marriage collapsed just as badly as the emotional side. Rob made a series of disastrous investments that drained the family's savings, and eventually he filed for bankruptcy, leaving Paige to somehow hold everything together on her own. She was left responsible for a steep monthly mortgage, responsible for feeding and clothing 3 children, responsible for a household that a single income could barely sustain, all while trying to shield her kids from just how bad things had gotten. But the money wasn't even the most frightening part. In 2004, Paige called emergency services in a state of panic after Rob threatened to kill their children. It's hard to imagine the fear behind that phone call. a mother pleading for help against the father of her own kids. The following year, in 2005, things escalated even further. Rob was arrested after punching Paige in the stomach while she was pregnant. Despite this disturbing pattern, when Paige eventually vanished, investigators moved quickly to clear Rob as a suspect. He had relocated across the country to Philadelphia, roughly 2,000 miles away, and had a solid, verifiable alibi for the day she disappeared. The monster from her past, it seemed, was not the one responsible for what came next. But the trauma of that marriage, the fear, the bankruptcy, the desperate need to provide for her children without any real safety net, set the stage for the secret Paige would soon build for herself. By the summer of 2007, Paige was doing what she always did, juggling motherhood, her dance studio, her side business, and whatever else it took to keep her family afloat. On the afternoon of June the 28th, she spent time with Ron Beigler, her first ex-husband, and the one man who had remained a genuine friend through everything. The two of them shared a relaxed picnic date together, the kind of easy, familiar afternoon two people share when there's history and trust between them. As evening set in, Ron called to check on her, a small habit that speaks to just how connected they still were. Paige told him she was driving home to her apartment and promised to text him once she arrived safely. That text never came. When Ron tried calling again, the phone went straight to voicemail. For most people, this might not seem alarming right away. Phones die. People get busy. But something about the silence felt wrong. And it kept feeling wrong as the hours turned into days. 3 days later, worried and unable to reach her, Ron went to Paige's apartment himself. It was there that he spoke to her live-in nanny and learned the truth that no parent's inner circle ever wants to hear. Paige hadn't been seen in 3 days. Her children had been cared for, but their mother, the woman who never missed a beat, never disappeared, never went silent, was simply gone. Alarm bells went off instantly. Everyone who knew Paige agreed on one thing without hesitation: she would never, under any circumstances, willingly abandon her children. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't by choice. As police began their investigation and Paige's family scrambled for answers, they turned to the most obvious place for clues: her personal laptop. What they found on that computer would completely transform the case, and it would reveal just how far Paige had gone to survive. Buried in her files, her browsing history, and her private accounts was evidence of an entire second life, one she had built quietly and carefully, hidden from everyone who loved her. To cover a mortgage payment of roughly $6,000 a month, on top of the day-to-day costs of raising 3 children, essentially alone, Paige had turned to working as a high-end escort. She operated under a pseudonym, calling herself Carrie, advertising adult companionship services online to a clientele who likely had no idea who she really was during daylight hours. To them, she wasn't a mother running a children's dance studio. She wasn't the woman selling kitchen gadgets at neighborhood parties. She was simply Carrie, a name attached to a service, a transaction, nothing more. Think about the sheer weight of that double life for a moment. By day, Paige stood in front of a room of little girls in tutus, teaching them pliés and pirouettes, smiling at their parents as they dropped off their kids. She hosted cheerful kitchen product parties, chatting about casserole dishes and measuring cups. And then, when the studio closed and the children were asleep, she stepped into an entirely different identity, one built purely out of financial desperation, one she likely prayed her own kids would never learn about. It's easy to sit back and judge a choice like this from a distance, but when you consider where Paige was standing, a woman battered by a violent second marriage, drained financially by her ex-husband's bankruptcy, staring down a mortgage that could swallow her family's stability whole, a very different picture starts to form. This wasn't a woman chasing excitement or escaping boredom. By every account from those who knew her, this was a mother trying to outrun the fear of not being able to provide, trying to keep her children in their home, in their school, in the only life they had ever known. She hid it well. That's perhaps the most striking part of all of this. Not her ex-husband, Not her closest family, not even Ron, who remained close to her right up until the day she disappeared, seemed to know the full truth. Paige had compartmentalized her life so completely that the two halves never touched, until her laptop cracked that wall wide open after she was already gone. And somewhere in that secret world, hidden among the anonymous names and cautious arrangements, was the person who would ultimately end her life. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story all the way through. And if this case has already got you hooked, make sure you're subscribed to Brian's Criminal Unmasking, because what happens next in Paige's story is going to leave you speechless. All right, back to the investigation. While detectives worked to make sense of Paige's secret life, evidence out on the highway was already telling its own disturbing story. Early in the search, pieces of torn paperwork bearing Paige's name and her children's names were discovered scattered along a stretch of road, as though they had been thrown from a moving vehicle in a hurry. Not long after, investigators located Paige's car abandoned on the side of the highway. What they found inside confirmed everyone's worst fears. The vehicle had been deliberately set on fire, with the flames intentionally started in the passenger seat, seemingly in an effort to destroy any trace of DNA evidence that might have been left behind. But one small, almost overlooked detail would end up being enormous. Investigators noticed that the driver's seat had been pushed back significantly, positioned for someone considerably taller than Paige. It was a subtle clue, easy to miss, but it strongly suggested that whoever drove that car last was not her. Someone else had been behind the wheel. Someone else had made the decision to torch it and walk away. For the family, this was the moment hope began to fracture. A mother who would never leave her children, a burned car with no trace of her inside, and now physical proof that someone else had been in control of that vehicle in her final hours. The pieces were forming a picture, but without a body, without a confession, and without a clear suspect locked down, the case would soon grow cold. As detectives dug deeper into Paige's secret escort work, one name began to surface again and again: Lester Ralph Jones, a middle-aged local mechanic who investigators believed had been a regular client of Paige's, someone who had paid for her time under her alias, Carrie. Lead prosecutor Dan Rubenstein zeroed in on Jones early in the investigation, convinced that he held the key to what really happened that night. But belief and proof are two very different things. And without a body, without forensic evidence tying him directly to a crime, the case against Jones simply could not move forward in any meaningful way. And so, agonizingly, the investigation stalled. Not for weeks, not for months. For 5 long years, Paige Birgfeld's disappearance remained an open wound with no resolution. Her children grew up without their mother, without answers, carrying the unbearable weight of not knowing whether she was alive somewhere or gone forever. Her family kept fighting, kept pushing investigators, kept refusing to let her case fade into a cold case file gathering dust. But time moved on, and the trail seemed to grow colder with every passing year. Then, in 2012, everything changed. 5 years after Paige vanished, a hiker walking through an area that earlier search parties had somehow missed stumbled upon human skeletal remains. It's a chilling reminder of just how vast and unforgiving rural terrain can be, how a person can be searched for by dozens of officers and volunteers and still remain hidden for half a decade in a landscape that never gave up its secret easily. The remains were sent for forensic testing, and dental records confirmed the devastating truth that Paige's family had been dreading and, in some painful way, quietly expecting for years. It was Paige. The forensic examination revealed the brutal nature of her final moments. Her jaw had been fractured, an injury inflicted shortly before her death, and remnants of duct tape were discovered near her mouth, evidence pointing toward restraint, toward violence, toward a death that was anything but peaceful. For 5 years her family had lived suspended in unbearable uncertainty. Now they had confirmation, but confirmation brought its own kind of devastation, a permanent physical proof of just how much suffering she endured in her final hours. With her remains finally identified, the investigation surged back to life with renewed urgency, and all roads led back to one man. Investigators pressed forward, and the evidence against Lester Ralph Jones began to mount in ways that were impossible to ignore. For one, Paige's torched car had been discovered just meters away from Jones's own workshop, a detail that placed him uncomfortably close to the physical evidence of her final hours. Surveillance footage further tied him to the case, capturing Jones purchasing a prepaid burner phone, a phone that records showed had been used to call Paige on the very day she disappeared. But it was a single, almost unbelievable phone call that would ultimately unravel everything. A sheriff's sergeant named Art Smith reached out to Jones regarding some vehicles that had been seized as part of the ongoing investigation. It should have been a routine, procedural conversation. Instead, in a moment that speaks volumes about guilt eating away at a person for years, Jones grew visibly anxious during the call. And then, almost as though the words escaped before he could stop them, he blurted out a chilling question, asking the sergeant where someone might go about burying a body. It's the kind of detail that sounds almost too dramatic to be real. The kind of slip you'd expect in a scripted crime thriller rather than an actual police interview. But it happened. A man who had evaded justice for 7 years, who had watched an investigation stall and nearly go cold, undid himself with a single panicked sentence. In November of 2014, 7 years after Paige Birgfeld first vanished from her own life, Lester Ralph Jones was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. The trial that followed brought together everything investigators had painstakingly assembled over the better part of a decade. The burned car, parked suspiciously close to his workshop. The burner phone used to call Paige on the day she disappeared. The driver's seat positioned for a much taller person. The fractured jaw, the duct tape residue, and finally, his own incriminating words during that fateful phone call with Sergeant Smith. In December of 2016, a jury reached its verdict. Lester Ralph Jones was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Paige's children, now grown up without the mother who had sacrificed so much to keep them safe, the verdict offered something they had waited nearly a decade for: accountability. It couldn't undo the years of not knowing. It couldn't give them back the childhood moments their mother should have been there for. But it confirmed, in the clearest way the justice system can offer, that the man responsible for taking her from them would never again walk free. When Paige Birgfeld's story made headlines, much of the coverage fixated on the most sensational detail: a secret escort, a double life, a scandal. But strip away the shock value, and what remains is a far more human story. One about a mother who survived a violent marriage, was left to rebuild alone with 3 children and a crushing mortgage, and made an incredibly difficult, dangerous choice in an effort to keep her family's world from falling apart. Paige wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless with her safety by nature. She built an entire alias, kept 2 completely separate lives running side by side, and told virtually no one, precisely because she understood the risk and the stigma involved. She weighed that risk against the alternative: losing her home, her children's stability, the life she had fought so hard to give them after Rob Dixon's bankruptcy and violence had already taken so much. And she chose to carry that danger silently, alone, rather than let her children feel the fallout. It's a story that forces an uncomfortable but important question. How many people, how many parents, are quietly carrying secrets just as heavy, making impossible choices behind closed doors, simply because the alternative feels even worse? Paige Birgfeld's case isn't just a murder investigation. It's a portrait of what desperation, love, and survival can push a person to do when the safety net beneath them has completely disappeared. She didn't get to see her children grow up. She didn't get to explain her choices to them herself, in her own words, on her own terms. That chance was taken from her on a summer night in 2007, by a man she likely trusted enough to meet, and who ultimately proved to be far more dangerous than any headline could capture. Her family waited 7 years for his name, and 5 of those years without even knowing where her body lay. In the end, justice came, but it came slowly, and it came only after her own children had already grown up in the shadow of her absence. That's the story of Paige Birgfeld, a mother who hid one of the most dangerous secrets imaginable, all in the name of protecting the children she loved more than anything. If this story moved you the way it moved me while researching it, do 3 quick things before you go. First, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Second, drop a comment below and tell me what part of Paige's story stuck with you the most. Was it the double life, the burned car, or that final phone call that gave everything away? And third, if you haven't already, subscribe to Brian's Criminal Unmasking and turn on notifications, because every week we uncover another case that the headlines never told you the full truth about. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.